Immediately contesting the center with this pawn push establishes a foothold and opens diagonal lines for future piece development. Developing the knight to its most active square immediately contests central influence and prepares kingside development, setting the stage for a dynamic game. Establishing central control and eyeing potential pawn breaks, white asserts immediate influence on the board. Solidifying the center and preparing for a kingside fianchetto, this move gracefully sidesteps the sharpest Catalan lines. Developing the knight to its most active square, preparing to control central squares and potentially support a kingside attack. Challenging the center's grip, this bishop aims to disrupt white's harmonious development and create pawn weaknesses. Solidifying central control and preparing castling, while offering flexibility for queenside development. Challenging the center immediately creates dynamic imbalances and opens lines for active piece play. Pressuring black's bishop immediately forces a decision, potentially disrupting their coordination and opening lines for white's pieces. Sacrificing the bishop for the knight immediately simplifies, altering the pawn structure in white's favor and giving black a doubled center pawn. Doubling pawns creates queenside weaknesses, but opens the b-file for rook potential. Unleashing the queen to this aggressive diagonal immediately disrupts white's pawn structure and seeks central influence, a bold statement of intent. Establishing a central pawn presence and preparing to contest the open c-file is a wise endeavor here. This knight finds a very active outpost, immediately pressuring white's center and eyeing weaknesses. Asserting queenside control, this secures the c3 pawn and prepares potential central pressure. Sacrificing the knight on d2 opens the queen's diagonal, creating immediate threats for black. Recapturing the knight opens a powerful diagonal for the queen, aiming to exploit the weakened queenside structure. Solidifying the pawn chain now opens lines for piece activity. Solidifying the center and preparing for kingside development, aiming for a robust pawn structure. Opening the center with this pawn thrust immediately challenges white's pawn majority and creates dynamic imbalances. Striking open the d-file decisively, white embraces central liberation, forcing black to make critical pawn decisions. Liberating the bishop and opening a diagonal, this pawn advance bravely challenges white's central grip. Developing the bishop to a diagonal that eyes black's weakened kingside pawn structure enhances white's attacking potential. Creating a protective buffer around your king now is a wise preventative measure against potential piece incursions. Bringing the king to safety unlocks the rook, preparing to contest central files and potentially exploit the doubled pawns. Safely tucking the monarch away is a prudent step, securing immediate safety and preparing for potential middle game skirmishes. Unleashing the f-pawn disrupts black's pawn structure and opens lines toward the king. Securing the knight on d7 fortifies your pawn chain and prepares for future pawn pushes on the king side, potentially creating counterplay. Unleashing a pawn storm, white aims to pry open the king side and exploit black's somewhat passive knight placement, but risks weakening their own structure. Unlocking the bishop on c8, black aims to challenge white's central pawns and potentially ignite a queenside counterplay. Introducing a knight to a commanding outpost, this maneuver aims to exploit black's slightly cramped kingside and prepare a central pawn storm. Shifting the queen to the king's flank prepares for a potential central pawn break, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure. Striking the knight clears the central e-file for potential pawn breakthroughs and simplifies the position. Reclaiming the queen with the rook-occupied queen's file now opens up avenues for central pawn activity. Securing the central dark squares while preparing to swing the rook to the king's flank offers potent attacking prospects. Instigating pressure along the b-file with the rook anticipates potential pawn breaks and prepares for a more active middle game. Asserting dominion over the central files and preparing to exploit the queen's slightly awkward placement. A proactive pawn push, intending to challenge the open d-file and potentially support a queenside advance, though it weakens the b6 square. securing the king's immediate vicinity against potential knight incursions. This subtle maneuver aims to prevent any unpleasant discoveries. A latent threat emerges as the bishop repositions, eyeing weaknesses across the queenside and hinting at future queenside expansion. Unlocking the d-file pressure, this maneuver simultaneously aims to restrict black's queen and prepare further queenside advances. Initiating a bold pawn advance to shatter white's central control and inject life into the queenside. Sacrificing the pawn opens a crucial diagonal for your bishop and targets black's underdeveloped queenside. Unleashing the rook to challenge white's pawn structure and claim an open file, opening up tactical possibilities on the queenside. Opening the c-file creates immediate pressure, forcing black to confront the structural weakness that now exists. The rook now eyes the queenside, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure and gain active placement on the half-open b-file. Asserting pressure along the open b-file, white aims to dismantle black's queenside pawn structure. Securing the d-file immediately solidifies black's central control and prepares for future pressure. Liberating the d-file with an exchange, aiming to simplify into a favorable endgame where your rooks dominate the open terrain. Reclaiming the b-file opens up black's queenside pawns and offers a chance for queenside counterplay. Opening the e-file could initiate powerful central pawn breakthroughs, potentially exposing black's king. Challenging the central pawn structure, this piece prepares to join the queenside fight and potentially open lines for a counterattack. Sharpening the attack, the queen swings to create threats against the queenside pawns and put pressure on the d-file. The bishop, now liberated from its prior confinement, aims to influence the central pawns and potentially disrupt white's queenside initiative. Unleashing the queen to infiltrate black's pawn structure, this move seeks to disrupt their coordination and exploit weaknesses. Reclaiming the initiative, black repositions the bishop to a more active diagonal, preparing for potential pawn pushes. Re-establishing pressure along the open file, this pawn push prepares to exploit the weakened queenside. Introducing the rook to the d-file now connects the rooks and prepares for potential pawn advances. Opening that queenside pawn chain offers a dynamic breakthrough opportunity for white's rook. Safeguarding the king is paramount. This king move prepares for potential queenside advances while acknowledging the open files. Pushing the flank pawn disrupts black's rook battery and seeks to exploit the exposed kingside. Unlocking the queenside pawns, black aims to stir activity and potentially create passed pawns, but concedes significant space on the queenside to white's advanced pawns. Capturing that pawn forces a significant endgame transition, where controlling the open files will be paramount. The rook's infiltration along the 6th rank finally finds its target, aiming to disrupt white's king's safety. Capturing the pawn creates a vacuum, forcing black to reinforce their defenses. Unleashing a counterattack along the 2nd rank, the rook eyes the unprotected white king, creating immediate chaos. Clearing the path for the bishop to activate along the long diagonal, a proactive step. Aggressive maneuvering of the queen seeks to disrupt white's pawn structure and create new attacking avenues. This rook redeployment initiates a potent flank assault, aiming to infiltrate black's queenside and exploit the exposed pawn structure. Unleashing the queen to threaten the pawn creates immediate counterplay and forces white to defend. Securing the monarch on a safer square allows for greater freedom of action in the looming material exchanges. Challenging white's control of the open files, this aggressive pawn thrust aims to disrupt black's queenside pawn structure and potentially create counterplay. Targeting the pinned knight on a6 with the queen forces black to consider a very awkward defensive setup. The rook's foray now offers a tantalizing sacrifice, probing white's defenses with an unexpected attacking opportunity. A daring rook sortie to the 8th rank, aiming to disrupt black's coordination and threaten infiltration. Finally, the queen returns to a more active position, potentially eyeing the now exposed king. Capturing the rook on a8 decisively ends the tactical fireworks and propels white toward a winning material advantage. Exchanging the rook simplifies to an endgame where white's pawns are poised to advance. Capturing the pawn now opens up lines for your bishops and could lead to an advantageous endgame. Activating the bishop to challenge white's isolated pawn offers black dynamic counterplay on the queen side. Exploiting the exposed dark squares around black's king becomes paramount now.